Oh, come on.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your job as a pre-calculus teacher.
So I was part-time. The school was about an hour from where I lived, and I had 3 classes. They were on block schedules, so I would see about 8 students 4 times a week for between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. And when I started teaching them, they were learning what's it called? The unit circle.
Okay, that's a really difficult part to teach in pre-calculus.
Yeah.
So there was only 8 students in the classroom, is that right?
Something like that. It was a very small class.
Okay.
And it was a small school in general anyway.
Okay, and you were hired mid-year, right?
Right. I was replacing a teacher that was retiring, and she was actually going to do something else, and I got the impression that she just didn't want to do the teaching anymore. She was tired of the problems that she was having. I thought I'd be able to come in and replace those struggles, but it turned out that she was actually she was the head of that department for a long time.
Oh, okay. Do you know what kind of struggles she was facing? Was it in the classroom, or is it more head of department? What kind of struggles were you trying to help out with?
In the interview, the administrators told me that she didn't want to talk to parents very much.
Okay.
I later found out that it was probably more likely due to well, when I observed her, I would notice a lot of how math used to be taught and how math is being addressed now with Common Core and Smarter Balance.
Okay.
But she was really good with. She had a huge amount of interaction with the more advanced students than with the younger students.
Okay. And so, what kind of differences did you notice? You said you noticed differences with how it used to be taught and how it's kind of being taught now. So she was teaching the older way, and you kind of were seeing some things that needed to be done differently to meet Common Core. Is that correct?
Sure. So a lot of it, what I saw was that she was the sole source of knowledge in the classroom. If a student didn't understand something, their resource would be her. In a pre-cal class like this, they had a textbook, but they never used it. They took notes in class. They did homework assignments. This particular school wasn't using. It was all standards-based assessment. Is that right? I can't remember the words, but proficiency-based assessments. So their homework had little value to their overall grade, and they could take tests over and over again, and the teacher would have to remake different versions of the test for the students to retake.
Okay, so going into it, it sounds like if the students are retaking many of their tests, then they maybe weren't understanding the concepts beforehand. Is that because they weren't doing their homework because it didn't matter much, or
that's the hard thing about Common Core is or proficiency based. If they don't practice the work on their own and they don't take responsibility for their learning, then I could only do so much to get them to learn the concepts. I could provide them with all sorts of different references, but with the small amount of time that I have in a classroom, and because I was part-time, I couldn't afford to spend more. I tried to spend as much time in the school as I can in the time that I wasn't being paid for. So a lot of times I got there very early in the morning, and the afternoons I could stay there after I was doing that, so I could be available and do all the paperwork that goes into like lesson planning and setting up things like that and doing assessment. But that was a real challenge because I was hired on a part-time basis.
Right.
So I was being compensated for time that I'd never seen any outcomes out of.
Okay. So what would you say was maybe your biggest struggle? So time was a struggle in getting the lesson plans that you would have liked to have had. But what would you say was maybe your biggest struggle in the classroom with the students or around their learning?
Part of it was I thought I understood what they were capable of doing. I understood the students better than I understood the content, and I thought that would be to my advantage, specifically with learning the unit circle, because a lot of that I had to reteach myself. A lot of these concepts are stuff that I spent time on, but I don't use these things very much. And I would tell the students, look, the goal isn't to memorize the stuff so that you can be able to access it further in later life. You're learning through learning math. You're becoming more abstract thinkers. You're going to be able to. There's bigger goals in the line than just memorizing this unit circle and trying to draw upon what they know in other areas and what they've also learned. And a lot of this unit circle stuff, I just try to encourage them. You just got to memorize these. You got to memorize the radians. It's more important to memorize the radians and the degrees, and like the formulas to be able to convert them to, or what with trigonometry, understanding the definitions of sine, cosine, tangent. With that, I was always a step ahead, but I thought I was being perceived as lacking the content knowledge.
But it sounds like, from what you're telling me and what I'm hearing, that the previous teacher, she was the sole source of their knowledge, and it sounds like at least a positive thing that came out of it was you came in and gave them encouragement and, told them what they could be doing on their own to help themselves with the unit circle and memorizing certain things, and then also making connections to trigonometry and things like that so that they could bring that knowledge hopefully into their own work and when they are working by themselves. Looking back on it now, what do you think you would maybe do differently to have a more positive outcome maybe in their learning or with those specific students? Or I guess I know it wasn't a positive experience overall at the school. What's one thing, looking back on it, that you would have liked to do differently or have worked on, or given that you didn't have extra time? I mean, I know you couldn't go back and just have extra time to work on stuff since you were part-time, but what's something you would have liked to have worked on?
It's a deep question. A lot of parts to it. I'm trying to think about it. I really wish I'd never taken the job in the first place, just because of the distance involved. And math is a really difficult thing to start teaching right now, just because I strongly believe that the Common Core is completely against the methods of assessment, and that it's. I think I read somewhere that we're going to be seeing a perfect storm in the next couple of years with very much smarter balance comes from a constructivist point of view, and the Common Core is very much the behavioralist point of view. And
so making that transition is really difficult.
On top of the assessment and the proficiency-based assessment, a lot of teachers in the school, they were taking their the ABCDF scale and trying to fit it into the 4-point rubric. And the students were lost in that. The parents had no idea understanding. I had kids that were, particularly in this class, they expected to be getting the good grades. And when they experienced failure, the blame was put on me.
Right.
And so then they went around and...
so you came in a transition time, though it sounds like it would have been really hard to come in at that time because they were being graded differently, a new teacher who teaches differently, also a very hard subject. So those are all things that are hard on the student and a new teacher. So if you were to be looking for a job again, it sounds like you were unhappy with that job, and you said you wish you wouldn't have taken it.
Well, it's interesting because when I was in the middle of teaching that job, I loved it. I loved that I was able to interact with the students, and that I was becoming more familiar with the concepts. A lot of the stuff that you see with when you're in a teaching job, you're limited on how much you can actually say the material because you're only seeing it from your point of view. But when you start implementing things and you start working with other students, you see where your mistakes and understanding are and how you can actively change. Without having teaching experience, it's really hard to become a better teacher.
Right. So do you think that if you had more communication with, it sounds like there wasn't a ton of communication in the building, maybe with you and others, like you were kind of alone a little bit on your own island.
I was collaborating with the other math teachers. In fact, and before I took over, I had a few days where I was observing the other math teachers and the teacher I was replacing, and she was one of the things that she recommended was just expect the students to memorize unit circle. When I talked to her about that, I asked her would it be more appropriate to go in a different direction, because from my point of view it seemed to make more sense because the students would be able to create their own understanding. But I blindly just accepted her advice, and in these situations when you've got even in the beginning of your you've got students that are unfamiliar with you, and it's really important to develop that sense of trust, because
Right.
you're replacing somebody that they already trusted.
Right.
But when you replace somebody else, you're not going to know a whole lot about how they were doing things. And so I think the biggest pitfall was that I was getting mixed messages from the administrators. They saw me a lot when I started teaching. They gave me specific feedback, and then all of a sudden it flipped, and I found out that they had already stopped investing. They already stopped supporting me to continue teaching. They were never. It seemed like they were never really on my side in the 6 weeks I was there.
So, did you ever go to the when they gave you this specific advice? Did you take that and go forth with it and try to improve what they had said, or just take their advice and go with it, or did some things you kind of shrug off because you were already dealing with so much? I mean, was it a mixture of both, or how do you feel you took their advice that they were giving you that was specific?
For that morning, I remember specifically they mentioned content. I lacked content knowledge and classroom management skills, and part of that, I mean, when I even asked for specific examples on that stuff, a lot of it came out of context, and so it's been hard to understand what they really mean by it. They also said I wasn't doing enough lesson plans, or that I appeared that in, and a lot of those came across to me as very confusing because I thought I was doing all those things.
So do you feel like you didn't have very much support from them?
Yeah.
Okay.
But because of that, I feel like now that I have this thing on my record, I can't really pursue any kind of math teaching position. And I already jumped through way too many hoops coming from out of state and trying to get endorsed in additional areas so I could become more of a valuable candidate for teaching.
So it seems like you are able, you said you felt like you were able to connect with the kids and build trust and respect with them, and that you enjoy teaching kids. So how do you feel you're going to take that and move forward in the future if you maybe don't want to be a math teacher? Those skills that I just mentioned are really hard to come by. So, and some people can work forever and not have it. It's just a natural gift that some people are given, and of course you can improve upon those. But being able to connect with kids is a really big deal. So how do you feel like, what direction do you want to go with that? Do you want to continue? I know you do I know you coach kids with their music and things like that. Do you want to go more in that direction? Or do you think you want to give math another try? It could have been just, a bad experience at a school, which I know we all have. I've had that before too, and it's really hard. So, but, I mean, sometimes you want to give up and it's hard, but sometimes and sometimes it is time to move on. What do you feel like you want to do now, or are you just unsure?
Well, when you apply for a job, there's so much that you don't know. It's just like when you buy a house or buy anything else. You move into that house, and a couple weeks later you find out that you've got ansett coming out from the foundation, and there's nothing that you can do. The guy that owns the house won't do anything to change it. There's so much of that I will never get an opportunity to understand. And so, if anything, if I was ever in a position to take on another math teaching position, it would have to be in a place where I had more information, in a place where I could feel like it would be more successful. Being beyond that, I don't think I could. I don't think I can get a teaching position in anything when I have this thing on the record that says somebody fired me because when it's that hot word, it's that hot topic. Like when you say that, it creates a ripple effect with whoever's listening to it, and so it doesn't matter if who was at fault. I got the outcome.
I don't necessarily feel like you have to say that though. I mean, I just got a new teaching job this year, and I was just hired, and at no point did they ever ask me why I was looking for a new teaching job or why I was leaving the school I was leaving, or if I was fired. They had no idea why. They just know I was working up until that year, and they don't know any of that stuff. They didn't know I was unhappy at the school I was at, and I chose to leave even though I was offered a contract. But for all they know, I could have been fired, and they just don't know that, and they don't care. So I feel like you could look for one if you wanted to. It's not like it's on your record, really.
Sure, but then how am I going to know that I'm going to find myself in the same situation? A lot of the problems that we see right now is like proficiency-based grading is really popular right now, and so is this Common Core and Smarter Balance that's going to be taking place in the next couple of years. I don't think I can teach effectively from the background that I know through music. I don't think I can implement effective math teaching because one of the problems I had in school was there was one student that asked, well, what do you know more about math or music? And I thought it was an unfair question at the time because I know more about and now when I thought about that question, I know more about teaching than I do about either of those areas.
Right,
I
think, yeah. I think something to also think about is at the end of this school year, I don't know if you're aware, but a lot of schools actually, like a law was passed and they're giving up proficiency because